I would like to explain the near-death experience, or how I believe that the near-death experience works. I believe that memory is composed of light and gravity, because they're both a wavelength. So I think memory works on wavelengths, and the wavelength of light and the wavelengths of gravity combine to create memory. And we live in three-dimensional space like this. It's a three-dimensional space, and light is a fourth-dimensional space, which is at 90 degrees to all of this space. So this is the fourth dimension. This dimension we call space, and this dimension we call time. I believe that light exists in the fourth dimension. The matter of light exists in the fourth dimension. We see the energy in the three dimensions as light, but if we could see into the fourth dimension, we would see it as simple matter. And matter exists in the three dimensions of space. And if you could go into the fourth dimension and look back at it, you would see that as light. So mass, I believe, is equal to the combination of matter squared plus light squared. These combine to create mass. So you got a 90-degree angle here. This is mass. This is light. This is matter. Matter and gravity are related. Can't have one without the other. And so I believe that these components combine to create memory. And matter cannot exist in the fourth dimension, and light cannot exist in the three dimensions. The energy of light exists here, and the energy of matter exists there, but the light itself cannot exist here, and matter cannot exist there. They're separate, but they can combine to create mass. And so wavelength is equal to the velocity over frequency, and frequency is equal to 1 over the period, and the period is equal to the time of the ending time minus the beginning time, gives you the period. So the fourth dimension is time. So you can store this sort of information in the fourth dimension. And light, the velocity of light equals c, which is like 180,000 meters per second. That's a constant. It's never going to change. So the wavelength of light, you can recreate the wavelength of light by simply storing the period of the wavelength, which you can store in the fourth dimension of time. So when an event occurs and we stand here and watch it, and the event reaches us, the light from this event can be converted into a period of time and stored in the fourth dimension as a period of time. It can be recreated as a wavelength, as a memory, just simply by capturing this period of time and then dividing it or multiplying it by the velocity of light. And we can recreate the wavelength of this event for the light portion of the event. That takes care of the fourth dimensional segment. That takes care of this fourth dimensional segment. And now, to get a hold of the spatial dimension, we would need the wavelength of gravity. But the wavelength of gravity doesn't have a constant velocity. Its velocity is variable. So we cannot simply store the period of the event in the fourth dimension as time. We have to let it remain within space where it exists inside the body. So gravity cannot be converted into anything. It remains with us in the 3 dimensions of space. Then by combining the wavelength of light with the wavelength of gravity, we recreate memory. And that's how we think and remember. Now, what does this have to do with the death experience? Well, when we die, we cannot take our gravity portion of our memory with us into the 4th dimension, because it can't exist there. Only light can exist in the 4th dimension, not gravity. And so when we die, we enter, I believe, the 4th dimension, because time comes, there's no time in the 4th dimension, and that's where we would go, because we need to leave behind time and space or enter a new realm. So when we die, we go to the 4th dimension, but we can only take our light portion of memory with us. We can't take the wavelength, we can't take the memory, the gravity portion of memory with us. It must remain behind here in the 3D space of the world. So I believe when we die, we see this light tunnel thing. As we enter into the 4th dimension, we see the light over here, but we also realize we're leaving behind our gravity and our mass, our time. A period of time is called history. We call this history. It's connected to periods of time. We call it history. This is all in the 4th dimension. The other portion, I believe, is this part. I call it knowledge. And so we leave our knowledge behind in the 3 dimensions of space. So things like that we touch or we're around or we're close to, they contain some of our knowledge that we leave behind. And so that's what I think the death experience is this separation of history from knowledge, this separation from light from gravity as we go on to a new universe filled with only light, and leave behind the old universe, which we leave behind our knowledge for others maybe who can tap into it and feel it and realize that maybe at one time we existed.